Dick Merriweather had never intended to become a farmer. At 47, with salt and pepper hair that had once been chestnut brown and hands that bore the calluses of almost 2 decades of agricultural labor, he still sometimes felt like an imposter among the generational farmers of Willow Creek Valley. The former accountant had inherited the struggling farm after his uncle Harlan's passing, trading spreadsheets for spreaders and ledgers for livestock. Among the animal residents of Merriweather Farm, none was older or wiser than Barnaby, a dapple-gray draft horse well into his 20s. Most farmers would have retired such an aged animal years ago, but Dick couldn't bring himself to part with the gentle giant who'd been his first friend on the farm. Though Barnaby no longer pulled plows or hauled heavy loads, he remained a steadfast companion, greeting Dick each morning with a soft nickering that somehow made the loneliness of rural life more bearable. Across the valley lived Magnolia Thornfield, a fiercely independent woman of 52 who'd been widowed 5 years earlier. Her farm, a modest but prosperous operation specializing in organic produce, shared a boundary with Dick's land. Despite being neighbors for years, their interactions had been limited to polite nods at the farmer's market and occasional fence-line conversations about weather patterns and crop yields. Neither Dick nor Magnolia would admit it, but each harbored a quiet admiration for the other. Dick respected Magnolia's agricultural expertise and resilience in the face of loss, while she appreciated his determination to learn farming from scratch and his evident care for his animals, particularly old Barnaby. It was a sweltering August afternoon when their carefully maintained neighborly distance was destined to collapse. Dick had been inspecting a damaged section of fencing in the north pasture where his small herd of Highland cattle grazed. Preoccupied with measurements for repairs, he failed to notice that Angus, his normally docile breeding bull, was showing signs of agitation. Barnaby, who often followed Dick on his rounds around the property, had been grazing nearby. The old horse's ears pricked forward, his body tensing as he sensed the bull's changing demeanor before any human could recognize the danger. Across the shared property line, Magnolia had driven her pickup to check on her irrigation system. Stepping out of her vehicle, she caught sight of the scene unfolding in Dick's pasture. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the bull's aggressive stance, head lowered, pawing at the ground, the unmistakable precursors to a charge. "Dick!" she shouted, her voice carrying across the field. "The bull!" Her warning came a moment too late. Angus, perhaps territorial or simply irritable from the heat, had already begun his charge toward the unsuspecting farmer. Dick turned just in time to see 1,600 pounds of muscle and horn bearing down on him, but not soon enough to escape. In that frozen moment, he realized with terrible clarity that his farming career might end before he'd truly mastered it. What happened next occurred so rapidly that later, neither Dick nor Magnolia could agree on the precise sequence of events. Barnaby, defying his advanced age and normally placid nature, lunged forward with surprising speed. The old horse clamped his teeth on the back of Dick's shirt and yanked him sideways with unexpected strength, just as Angus thundered past, missing the farmer by inches. Magnolia vaulted over the fence, racing toward the fallen man as Barnaby positioned himself protectively between Dick and the circling bull. Their peaceful afternoon had transformed into a life-or-death drama in the golden sunlight of the north pasture. Dick lay stunned in the trampled grass, struggling to process what had just happened. His heart hammered against his ribs, while his mind replayed the terrifying image of Angus charging toward him. Above him stood Barnaby, the old horse's sides heaving with exertion, eyes fixed vigilantly on the bull that was now pawing the ground 20 yards away, preparing for another charge. "Don't move," Magnolia commanded, reaching Dick's side. Her voice, though urgent, carried a steadiness that immediately calmed him. "Angus isn't finished." Together, they watched as the bull lowered his head again. Magnolia, who had grown up around livestock, quickly assessed their precarious situation. The nearest fence was 30 yards away, too far to reach before the bull could overtake them. Barnaby, despite his brave intervention, was no match for an enraged bull if Angus decided to attack again. "Can you stand?" Magnolia whispered, never taking her eyes off the bull. "I think so," Dick replied, wincing as pain shot through his ankle. "But I might have twisted something when Barnaby pulled me down." With remarkable composure, Magnolia helped him to his feet. Barnaby remained positioned between them and the bull, as if understanding his role as protector. The old horse's loyalty brought tears to Dick's eyes. This animal he'd kept out of sentiment rather than utility had just saved his life. "We need to move very slowly toward your truck," Magnolia murmured. "I'll help you. Let Barnaby stay between us and Angus." Step by painstaking step they began their retreat. Dick leaned heavily on Magnolia, grateful for her strength and calm guidance. Barnaby seemed to understand the strategy, moving backward in perfect coordination with them, maintaining the protective barrier. Angus watched their retreat, his dark eyes unreadable. Once he took several threatening steps forward, causing them to freeze in place, but Barnaby responded with a warning snort and pawed the ground in challenge. Despite the old horse's advanced years, something in his demeanor gave the bull pause. As they inched closer to safety, Dick became increasingly aware of Magnolia's arm around his waist, supporting his weight. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been in such close physical proximity to another person. Since moving to the farm, his life had become increasingly solitary, his days filled with work rather than human connection. "You know," Magnolia said softly as they continued their careful retreat, "I've always wondered why you kept that old horse. Now I understand." "Barnaby's been my best friend out here," Dick admitted. "Sometimes I think he's the only one who doesn't see me as the city slicker playing farmer." Magnolia glanced at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Is that how you think we see you?" Before Dick could respond, Angus decided to charge again. Barnaby reacted with startling ferocity, rearing up on his hind legs and striking out with his front hooves. The bull veered away, unwilling to challenge the horse's unexpected defense. That moment of diversion allowed them to finally reach the fence. With Magnolia's help, Dick managed to clamber awkwardly over it, wincing as his injured ankle protested. Once on the other side, he turned back in alarm. "Barnaby, we can't leave him." But the old horse, having ensured his master's safety, was already trotting along the fence line toward the open gate at the corner of the pasture, as if he'd understood the entire escape plan. Angus, perhaps satisfied that the intruders had left his territory, had already lost interest and returned to grazing. As they watched Barnaby make his way safely out of the pasture, Magnolia turned to Dick. "That's no ordinary horse you have there. And you're no ordinary city slicker either." For the first time since the terrifying ordeal began, Dick managed to smile. "I think we both have a lot to learn about each other, neighbor." The following weeks brought changes to Merryweather Farm that Dick could never have anticipated. His sprained ankle meant he couldn't manage the daily farm tasks alone, and Magnolia, to his surprise and quiet delight, had offered to help until he recovered. Each morning she arrived in her weathered pickup truck, thermos of coffee in hand, ready to assist with the chores that couldn't wait. "You don't have to do this," Dick insisted on the third day, watching from his porch as Magnolia efficiently distributed feed to his chickens. "You have your own farm to run. Orville and Pendleton are handling things at my place," she replied, referring to her two nephews who had come to stay for the harvest season. "Besides, isn't this what neighbors are for?" What began as necessary assistance gradually evolved into something neither of them had expected. They developed a rhythm working together, discovering complementary strengths. Dick's methodical approach to record-keeping improved Magnolia's haphazard accounting system, while her innate understanding of soil and seasons helped him plan more effective crop rotations. Most evenings ended with them sharing simple meals at Dick's kitchen table, conversations stretching long into the night. They discovered shared passions for classical music and mystery novels, and a mutual distaste for the encroaching development threatening the rural character of Willow Creek Valley. "I never understood why Harlan left me this place," Dick confessed one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the fields. "I'd only visited a handful of times as a child. There were closer relatives who actually knew something about farming." Magnolia considered this, rocking gently in the old wooden chair that had been Harlan's favorite. "Your uncle was a perceptive man. Perhaps he saw something in you that you hadn't discovered in yourself yet. Or perhaps he simply wanted to punish me for becoming an accountant," Dick joked, though there was a hint of old insecurity beneath his words. "Either way, he would be proud of what you're doing here," Magnolia said firmly. "Not many would have stuck it out the way you have." Throughout these newfound moments of companionship, Barnaby held a special place. The old horse had become something of a hero in Dick's eyes, and Magnolia often brought special treats, carrots from her garden or particularly crisp apples, when she visited. The dapple-gray draft horse would nicker softly whenever her truck appeared in the driveway, as if he too had developed an affection for their visitor. One evening, as autumn's first chill crept into the air, Dick's ankle had healed enough for a careful walk around the property. Magnolia accompanied him, Barnaby following like a faithful shadow. They paused at the north pasture, the scene of the near tragedy that had brought them together. "I've been thinking," Dick said hesitantly, "about what you said regarding Angus. That he might need more space." Magnolia nodded. "Bulls can get territorial, especially in confined areas. Your north pasture is beautiful but small for an animal with his temperament. What if we removed part of the fence between our properties? The words tumbled out before Dick could reconsider them. Create a shared pasture. Better for the animals and... He hesitated, maybe better for the farmers too. The implication hung in the air between them. This wasn't just about livestock management, it was about breaking down the boundaries they'd maintained for years. Magnolia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the fading light. Then she reached out and took his hand, her calloused palm warm against his. I think Harlan knew exactly what he was doing when he left you this farm, Dick Merriweather. As if in agreement, Barnaby nudged Dick's shoulder gently, nearly pushing him into Magnolia's arms. They both laughed, the sound carrying across the fields as twilight settled over Willow Creek Valley and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. By the time winter descended on Willow Creek Valley, the landscape between Merriweather Farm and Thornfield Acres had transformed. The shared pasture had expanded beyond their initial plan, with additional fencing removed to create a harmonious blend of both properties. Their farming operations, once entirely separate, now functioned with increasing integration. Dick's Highland cattle fertilizing fields that would grow Magnolia's organic vegetables, her irrigation system extended to nurture his struggling apple orchard. December brought the heaviest snowfall the valley had seen in decades. On the winter solstice, as darkness fell early and snowflakes swirled in the golden light of Dick's farmhouse windows, he and Magnolia sat before the fireplace, reviewing their plans for spring planting. I've been thinking about something, Magnolia said, setting aside her notebook. Her normally confident voice held an unusual hesitancy. About us. About this arrangement. Dick felt his heart quicken. Over the months, their relationship had deepened into something neither had put into words, existing in meaningful glances and the casual brush of hands, in shared laughter and comfortable silences. What about it? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. People are talking, she said simply. The Wilkinson sisters at the general store asked me yesterday if we had big news to share. Dick couldn't suppress a smile. I suppose we have been spending most of our time together. It's more than that and you know it. Magnolia met his gaze directly, a challenge in her eyes. We're essentially running these farms as one operation now. We've torn down fences, combined herds, planned crops together. Your tractor spends more time in my fields than yours, and half my tools have migrated to your workshop. Are you regretting the arrangement? Dick asked, sudden uncertainty making his voice rough. Quite the opposite. Magnolia's expression softened. I'm wondering if we should make it official. Before Dick could respond, a sharp knocking at the door interrupted them. It was Pendleton, Magnolia's younger nephew, his face flushed with cold and exertion. It's the animals, he gasped. The old stable's roof is collapsing under the snow. We've moved most to the new barn, but Barnaby won't budge. They rushed into the storm, fighting through thigh-deep snowdrifts toward the ancient stable that predated even Harlan's ownership of the farm. Inside, they found Barnaby standing stubbornly in his stall, ears flat against his head, refusing Orville's attempts to lead him to safety. Above them, the roof beams groaned ominously beneath the weight of accumulated snow. He's never been in the new barn, Dick realized aloud. He's afraid. The roof won't hold much longer, Orville warned, eyeing the buckling timbers. Magnolia approached the old horse, speaking in low, soothing tones. Remember how you saved Dick from the bull, old friend? Now we need to save you. Something in her voice seemed to reach the anxious animal. Barnaby's ears pricked forward, his eyes focusing on her face. Slowly, she took hold of his halter while Dick stroked the horse's neck reassuringly. Together, they began leading him toward the stable doors. They had almost reached safety when the first beam gave way with a deafening crack. Without hesitation, Dick pushed Magnolia and Barnaby forward while throwing himself backward, narrowly avoiding the collapsing section of roof. Dick. Magnolia's scream pierced through the rumble of falling timbers and snow. For a terrifying moment, dust and debris obscured everything. When it settled, Dick found himself in a small pocket of space, surrounded by fallen beams but miraculously unharmed. The stable had partially collapsed, leaving him trapped but alive. I'm okay, he called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Stay back, it's not stable. Through a gap in the wreckage he could see Magnolia's face, pale with fear. Beyond her stood Barnaby, the old horse watching the scene with what seemed like understanding in his wise eyes. We'll get you out, Magnolia promised, her voice tight with emotion. Just hold on. As Orville and Pendleton ran to get ropes and tools, Magnolia stayed where Dick could see her, their eyes locked across the barrier of broken wood and snow. In that moment of uncertainty, with danger still looming, The truth of what they meant to each other crystallized with perfect clarity. Dawn broke over Willow Creek Valley, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold. In the farmhouse kitchen, Magnolia poured coffee into Dick's favorite mug, her hand steady despite having been awake all night. The rescue had taken hours, careful work to remove debris without triggering further collapse. By the time they'd extracted Dick from the ruined stable, midnight had long passed. "You should be resting," she said, placing the mug before him at the kitchen table. Despite the exhaustion etched on his face, he'd insisted on checking the animals at first light. "I'm fine," he assured her, though the bandage around his forearm and the bruises darkening his shoulder told a different story. "Just scrapes." Magnolia sat across from him, her own fatigue evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "The stable's a complete loss." "It was time," Dick admitted. "Should have torn it down years ago, but it was Harlan's," Magnolia finished for him. She understood his attachment to his uncle's legacy, his reluctance to change what the old man had built. They sat in comfortable silence, watching sunlight strengthen across the fields. Their shared pasture stretched before them, cattle and horses already moving through the snow, dark shapes against pristine white. "Barnaby seems none the worse for wear," Dick observed, spotting the dapple gray near the fence line. "For an old horse, he's remarkably resilient." "Like someone else I know," Magnolia said with a small smile. "You're both survivors." The events of the night had left something unresolved between them, the conversation interrupted by crisis, the question Magnolia had raised hanging unanswered. Dick cleared his throat, gathering courage. "About what you said before the stable collapsed, about making our arrangement official." Magnolia's eyes met his, unwavering. "Yes. I've been thinking that it makes good business sense," he began carefully. "Consolidated operations, shared equipment costs, tax benefits even." A flicker of disappointment crossed her face. "Yes, the practicalities are compelling. But that's not why I want to do it," Dick continued, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Accounting taught me to see the world in balanced columns, assets against liabilities. But nothing in my training prepared me for you, Magnolia Thornfield." Her fingers tightened around his. "What are you saying, Dick?" "I'm saying that what began as neighborly help has become the most important relationship in my life. That I want more than shared pastures and combined herds. I want shared mornings and evenings, plans made together for seasons beyond just planting and harvest." Tears brightened Magnolia's eyes. "Are you proposing a merger, Mr. Merriweather?" "I'm proposing marriage, Miss Thornfield," he answered, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "If you'll have a late-blooming farmer who's still learning the ropes." Magnolia rose from her chair and came around the table, kneeling beside him despite her arthritic knee. "I thought you'd never ask." Their kiss, gentle and affirming, held the promise of countless more to come. When they finally drew apart, Dick noticed something through the window that made him laugh. "Look," he said, pointing. Outside in the snowy pasture, Barnaby stood at the fence, his gray head visible through the kitchen window, as if witnessing their moment. The old horse who had saved Dick from the charging bull, who had brought them together, seemed to be offering his blessing. By spring, Merriweather Farm and Thornfield Acres had officially become one property, Thornfield Merriweather Homestead, according to the new sign at the drive entrance. The wedding took place in the apple orchard, blossoms drifting down like snow as they exchanged vows before friends and neighbors who had watched their relationship bloom with knowing smiles. Barnaby, sporting a garland of wildflowers around his neck, stood nearby throughout the ceremony, the guest of honor. Dick had whispered the old horse a special promise that morning: a forever home, green pastures, and all the carrots he could eat for the remainder of his days. As Magnolia and Dick sealed their vows with a kiss, applause erupted from the gathered community. The journey that had begun in danger had led to love, proving that sometimes it takes an old horse, a charging bull, and two stubborn farmers to create the kind of happiness neither had thought possible after so many years of solitude. In Willow Creek Valley, where seasons dictated the rhythm of life, a new season had begun. One built on second chances, unexpected heroes, and the courage to tear down fences both literal and figurative. And in the north pasture where it all began, wildflowers now grew where once danger had threatened, a testament to how quickly life can change when one is brave enough to let it.